She never walked out of that hotel again. Security cameras caught a 21-year-old tourist walking into the City Life Hotel with a man she had met earlier that same evening. They're linked arm in arm, calm, relaxed. Nothing seems out of place. She gets into the elevator with him. That's the last moment she is ever seen alive. The next morning, that same man leaves the hotel alone. Within a matter of hours, he buys a suitcase, cleaning supplies, and rents a car. Later, he also rents a carpet cleaning machine. That evening, he's seen pushing 2 large suitcases through the hotel lobby on a cart. At no point is she with him. He claims they simply said goodbye out on the street. But the surveillance footage tells a different story. When police begin searching his room, they find traces of blood he tried to clean up. A few days later, he changes his story. He says he woke up and she was already dead. And then he did what, in his words, felt like the only option. He put her body into a suitcase and drove out of the city. Guys, let me grab you for just a second. I'm really curious where my audience is watching from, so I'd love to ask you to drop your city in the comments and tell me what time it is for you right now. Thanks for taking a moment. Go ahead and share that below, and I'll keep going. Grace Emmy Rose Mullane was born in Essex, England, in 1996. She was the youngest of 3 children in the family of David and Gillian, and she had 2 older brothers, Michael and Declan. She was outgoing, full of life, very family-oriented, and she loved anything creative or artistic. Grace studied at the University of Lincoln, where she earned a degree in advertising and marketing. She was excited for new adventures before stepping into the next chapter of her life. After graduating, she saved up enough money to go on a year-long backpacking trip. People described Grace as compassionate and caring. Before leaving, she cut off her long hair and donated it to the Little Princess Trust so it could be made into wigs for children battling cancer. In October 2018, Grace left her family home and set off on her journey. Brave and open to the world, she traveled to Peru and then spent 6 weeks exploring South America. Along the way, she met other travelers and stayed in touch with her loved ones back home, sharing her experiences with them. On November 19th, 21-year-old Grace arrived in New Zealand on her own, and 11 days later, she made her way to Auckland. She checked into a hostel called the Base Backpackers on Queen Street, where she shared a room with other travelers. On the evening of Saturday, December 1st, 2018, Grace left the hostel just before 6 p.m. and headed into the city center. She was wearing a knee-length black dress, white shoes, and carried a small handbag. She had arranged to meet someone she had connected with on Tinder. At first, Grace wasn't completely sure about the date, but after talking more, they decided to meet up for a drink.
On behalf of New Zealand, I want to apologise to Grace's family. Your daughter should have been safe here, and she wasn't, and I'm sorry for that.
Grace met up with her date at a place called Sky City, an entertainment complex filled with bars, restaurants, and a casino. She was messaging her friend Amina back home.
We're getting along really well. He's a manager in the oil industry, and he's staying at a hotel.
Shortly after 9:30 that night, they left the bar together, walking arm in arm down the street. The next day was Sunday, December 2nd, and it was Grace's 22nd birthday. Her family and friends back home were sending her messages and trying to reach her through social media, but something felt off. Grace wasn't replying to anyone, and both of her phones were going straight to voicemail. Her brother Declan later said that she usually flooded them with updates and photos from her trip, so the silence on her birthday immediately raised concern. Grace was very close to her family, and this just didn't feel right. Her parents contacted police in Auckland and reported her missing on December 5th. Officers reached out to the hostel where Grace had been staying, and staff confirmed she had not returned on the night of December 1st. At first, police didn't suspect any crime. Most of her belongings were still at the hostel, and it seemed possible she had simply stayed out with new friends and hadn't checked in. Fortunately for investigators, the city's extensive surveillance camera network made it possible to quickly trace Grace's movements that Saturday night. The man she had been seen with was identified soon after. That same evening, the last night Grace was seen, she had changed her Facebook profile picture. Under that photo, a comment appeared. Beautiful, very radiant. The comment had been left by the same man she had met on Tinder and gone out drinking with that night. That man was Jesse Kempson, who at the time was staying at the City Life Hotel in Auckland. Not long before that, Jesse had made a post that drew even more attention. In it, he wrote about regretting his mistakes, his arrogance, and his selfishness. But who was Jesse Kempson, really? 26-year-old Jesse was born in Wellington and moved several times as a child after his parents separated. He was partly raised by his grandparents and had little to no contact with many of his relatives. Everyone who knew him described Jesse as a pathological liar. He made things up constantly, from claiming he was related to a famous All Blacks player to telling people he was dying of cancer. He lied to employers, landlords, partners, family, and friends. Again and again, the world Jesse created would fall apart, and because of his compulsive lying, he often lost jobs and was forced out of places he rented. One of his former landlords said Jesse claimed he was a professional softball player who had signed with New Zealand's national team, the Black Sox. He said he was just waiting for the contract money to come through, but after 8 weeks of excuses, the landlord contacted the team directly, and the lie was exposed. At the City Life Hotel, he told his landlord he was a top-level manager at Woolworths, but in reality, his rent was being covered by government assistance. His most recent job had been in telesales, and that also ended when his lies caught up with him. All of this happened on the very same day he met Grace Mullane, December 1st. Jesse was the last person seen with Grace that night, and police knew he might be able to fill in the missing pieces. On December 5th, the same day Grace was reported missing, Jesse was brought in for questioning and asked a series of routine questions.
Tell us about Grace.
So I was talking to Grace on Tinder.
Yeah.
We'd matched on Friday. I saw that we'd matched the next day on Saturday. And then we met at Sky City. And then we decided that we were going up to Andy's Burger Bar, which is on the first floor.
Whose idea was it to go to that particular burger place?
Me. Because I didn't initially know that she was real.
What do you mean?
Well, there's a lot of... So have you heard of catfish?
No.
So catfishing is where someone uses your profile, or uses your photos and pretends to be you and then meets, and you're a completely different person.
How does meeting in a public place sort of protect you from meeting someone who's not as good looking as...
Well, there's security there. So if she wasn't who she said she was,
Yeah.
at least in my mind, I'd feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's us.
Down there?
Yeah. So she's going that way, and I'm going across the street. I go down Queen Street. No, I go down Victoria Street, straight down to the bottom, and then hang a left, and I head towards the viaduct.
You've kind of walked in a bit of a funny direction if you were planning to go to the viaduct. Is there a particular reason you were going to do that?
I feel safer down that way.
And we're very, very concerned for her safety, obviously. It's entirely possible that she's been the victim of foul play. You understand what that means? What would your feelings be about providing us with a voluntary DNA sample in the event that we can compare that against something? Would you be happy with that?
100%. I mean, I know I haven't done anything wrong, so I'm happy to do it.
Okay. At this stage, we don't know what's happened to this girl.
Okay.
It's possible that somebody has killed her. Okay? You understand that? She might, when I say foul play, I mean that someone might have murdered her. Don't know if she's been murdered or not yet. She may be alive and well.
Okay.
But she might also be dead.
Okay.
Okay? And it could be that you've done it.
Hey, I just want to ask a question. Am I being arrested for something I didn't do?
You haven't been arrested, mate.
Oh.
No.
Oh. I was like, holy shit.
He claimed nothing unusual had happened that night. According to him, the date ended on a good note. They hugged, he kissed her on the cheek, and they agreed to meet again the next day before going their separate ways around 10 p.m. He said that the following day he tried to message her on Tinder, but noticed that Grace had unmatched him, and just like that, their communication suddenly ended. But officers were not done reviewing the surveillance footage from the City Life Hotel, and that's where they expected to find answers to the questions that still remained. Piece by piece, a disturbing and ominous picture began to come together as nearly 6 terabytes of surveillance data were carefully analyzed. Despite Jesse's claim that they had simply parted ways on the street, cameras captured them entering the City Life Hotel together, arm in arm. They were seen getting off the elevator on Jesse's floor, but Grace was never seen leaving the building after that. The next morning, on Grace's birthday, cameras showed Jesse walking out of the hotel, and over the following hours, his movements were tracked almost step by step. That morning, he left the hotel and went to a store where he bought a suitcase. Then he went on to buy cleaning supplies, and just before noon, he took a taxi to a rental company where he rented a red Toyota Corolla. A few hours later, Jesse met up with another woman he had connected with on Tinder. She later said their conversation quickly turned unsettling. He started talking about burying bodies and mentioned friends he claimed worked in law enforcement. According to her, the interaction made her so uncomfortable that she refused to get into the car with him and chose to go home on her own, never speaking to him again. After that, Jesse returned to the city center, this time to rent a Rug Doctor carpet cleaning machine. He told the staff he needed it to remove red wine stains. Later that evening, around 9:30, Jesse loaded 2 large suitcases onto a hotel cart and moved them out to the Toyota he had rented earlier. At around 7 a.m. the next morning, cameras picked him up again, this time as he was buying a shovel. About 2 hours later, he was seen washing the car with a high-pressure hose. After that, he returned the vehicle to the rental company, and it was later rented out to someone else. On December 5th, the day Grace was reported missing, Jesse was spotted at different locations around the city, throwing items into trash bins. Police arrived at the City Life Hotel to speak with him, and at that exact moment, Jesse himself walked back into the hotel. As soon as he noticed the officers, he abruptly turned around and started walking the other way, head down. The officers caught that behavior right away, went after him, and brought him in for questioning. Even though Jesse denied any involvement, police still moved forward with a thorough search of his hotel room.
Tonight with a public appeal for missing British backpacker Grace Millane. A short time ago, police held a press conference to appeal for sightings of the 22-year-old who has not been seen since 7:15 p.m. on Saturday night.
On December 7th, David, Grace's father, was already in Auckland. He flew there without hesitation, driven by one goal and one goal only, to find his daughter. The exhaustion from the trip, the tension, the anxiety, it all showed in the way he moved, but he held himself together, focused on what mattered most. In a city completely unfamiliar to him, he suddenly found himself at the center of events that were unfolding fast and without pause. He made an emotional public plea for help. His words were raw and deeply sincere. This wasn't just a statement, it was a father's desperate cry as he searched for his child. You could hear the hope in his voice, still there, but already mixed with growing fear. He asked for any information, any detail that could help find Grace, stressing how important it was for people not to stay indifferent. It was the moment when a private tragedy became public, and every word he spoke resonated with those who were listening.
I'm David Millane, Grace's dad. Thank you for coming today. As you know, Grace has been missing for several days. We last had contact with her on Saturday the 1st of December, and as a family we've been extremely concerned for her welfare. Grace is a lovely, outgoing, fun-loving, family-orientated daughter. Grace has never been out of contact for this amount of time, She's usually in daily contact with either her mother, myself, her two brothers, members of the family on social media. She arrived here on the 20th of November and has been bombarding us with numerous photographs and messages of her adventures. We are all extremely upset, and it is very difficult at this time to fully describe the range of emotions we are going through.
The investigation was gaining momentum fast, intensifying with every passing hour. While police did not officially name him, they confirmed they had already spoken with Jesse and that he was a person of interest in the case. It was a restrained, almost neutral phrase, but behind it, you could feel the weight of the situation. Investigators chose their words carefully, sticking to procedural precision, yet the overall tone of their statements was becoming more and more concerning. As the hours went by, the tension kept building. People followed the news closely, waiting for any detail that might shed light on Grace's disappearance. Slowly, that sense of hope began to shift. What at first felt like a search with a chance of rescue was starting to feel very different. Police openly stated they had serious concerns for Grace's safety. It was the kind of statement that sounded like a warning, controlled in tone but deeply telling. On December 8th, as more evidence came in and the timeline became clearer, Jesse was finally taken into custody. He was questioned again, this time under very different circumstances, where every word carried weight. The atmosphere during those interviews was tense, filled with details that were slowly forming a single, coherent narrative, and that's when his version of events changed dramatically. What had once sounded like one story suddenly turned into something else entirely. That shift did not go unnoticed. It became another key moment in the investigation, one that only deepened suspicion and sharpened focus on every detail of his statements.
That you're willing to speak to us about the events of last Saturday. Is that correct?
Yes.
Tell me what happened last Saturday.
She started talking to me about 50 Shades of Grey. We started having sex. At first it was just normal. And then she asked me if we could get into bondage, having, I guess, more violent sex. We ended up on the floor, and then she told me to hold her throat. So I went into the shower, and then all I remember is falling asleep in the shower. I need to stop. I need to go.
Jesse said that when he woke up the next morning and realized Grace was dead, he went into shock. According to him, it hit suddenly and felt overwhelming, like reality collapsed in an instant without any warning. He described his state as pure panic, a loss of control, where his thoughts were scattered and his decisions were made on impulse, without any clear sense of the consequences. He claimed that in that state, he put her body into a suitcase. In his version of events, it wasn't a calculated plan, but a chaotic reaction to what had just happened. He then drove off to dispose of the body, acting quickly, as he put it, trying to get out of a situation that had spiraled beyond his control. The way he told it, it was a chain of rushed decisions driven by fear. At the same time, he continued to firmly deny any guilt. Even while describing what he did after Grace's death, he did not admit intent or responsibility for what had happened. His position never changed. He stuck to his version of events, despite the growing body of evidence that was beginning to challenge it.
I didn't know what to do. I went downstairs and I was just, I don't know, I was all over the place.
You come out of the shower.
Yep.
The light's been on in the shower.
Yep.
You put a towel around you. You've turned the light off, and then you've returned to your bed and you've gone to sleep in your bed. And at that point, when you exit the shower, you don't look around, but your assumption from the silence.
I thought that she had gone. I thought she had left.
We're going to head out of here very, very soon, and you're going to take us to where you've buried her. She will likely be exhumed tomorrow.
Okay.
At some point, and after that, a pathologist, a specialist doctor, will perform a post-mortem. They're very skilled at establishing people's causes of death. Do you understand that? Yeah. Did you kill Grace Mullane? Okay. Jesse Kempson, you're under arrest for the murder of Grace Millane.
The forensic search of Jesse's hotel room added even more disturbing detail to the story. Despite his attempts to clean everything up and hide the evidence, the reality looked very different. The floor of the room was covered in Grace's blood, not just isolated spots, but patterns that pointed to the intensity of what had happened. Even after cleaning, there were still visible traces that couldn't be completely erased. For investigators, this became yet another indication that the events in that room were far more serious and violent than they had been portrayed. Based on Jesse's statements, it didn't take police long to narrow down the search area. What he said, along with the details he provided and the ones he may have tried to conceal, quickly led them to a specific location. Search teams were sent to the scenic drive area near the Waitakere Ranges, a remote place where the chances of witnesses were low and it was easier to go unnoticed. Shortly after 4 p.m. that day, officers made the discovery. About 10 yards from the road, they found a body. It was the moment that erased any remaining hope. The silence of that place stood in stark contrast to the scale of the tragedy and to what had now become an undeniable reality.
The area was identified late last night as a location of interest as a result of our investigative work. I can now advise that a short time ago, we located a body which we believe to be Grace. The formal identification process will now take place. However, based on the evidence we have gathered over the past few days, we expect that this is Grace. The focus now is to piece together exactly what happened to a young girl who came to New Zealand on her OE. Obviously, this brings the search for Grace to an end. It is an unbearable time for the Millane family, and our hearts go out to them. Any father, any parent in this situation will struggle. Yeah, I feel for my other daughter in her 20s. So, yeah, we're putting a lot of support around him. It's difficult because he's here with a brother from England and the rest of the family are back home.
Detective Inspector Scott Beard led the investigation and worked closely with the Millane family, staying in contact with them throughout the entire process. For him and his team, this was never just another case. It was a race against time, driven by a hope that slowly began to fade. They truly believed they might find Grace alive, that they could return to her family with news that would change everything for the better. But with each passing day, it became more and more clear that hope was slipping away. And when the truth became undeniable, it was a heavy, almost unbearable moment for everyone involved in the search. You could feel the disappointment, the pain, and the deep realization that the worst had already happened. The entire country shared in the grief. The news spread quickly, echoing through thousands of quiet, heartfelt voices filled with sympathy. People across the nation paid tribute to Grace, leaving flowers, lighting candles, and gathering for vigils. These were moments of silence where no words were needed. People came simply to be there, to stand together in a loss, felt even by those who had never known her personally. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern publicly apologized to Grace's parents, acknowledging that the country had failed to protect her. It was a rare and powerful statement, not formal or distant, but deeply human and full of compassion. She promised full support, both from herself and from the entire nation, emphasizing that this tragedy did not affect just one family. It was something the whole country felt.
I cannot imagine the grief of her family and what they will be experiencing and feeling right now. And my thoughts and prayers are with her father, David, who is in the country, her mother, Gillian, who cannot be here, and her wider family, friends, and loved ones. And so, on behalf of New Zealand, I want to apologise to Grace's family. Your daughter should have been safe here, and she wasn't, and I'm sorry for that. I've advised the family through the police that if there is anything we can do to assist, we are here to help with that.
After that, Jesse Kempson was formally charged with the murder of Grace Millane. It was the moment when the case fully shifted from an investigation into an active criminal prosecution. On December 10th, just 5 days after Grace had been reported missing, Jesse appeared in court in Auckland. The speed at which everything unfolded only highlighted the strength of the evidence and the intensity of the investigation. He was granted interim name suppression, a temporary order meant to protect the fairness of the trial and prevent public exposure from influencing the case. Because of that, for a significant period of time, much of the footage from his interviews remained blurred, his face concealed, and his identity not officially disclosed, maintaining procedural neutrality. Following the autopsy, the forensic pathologist confirmed that Grace had been strangled. This was a critical finding that defined the nature of the crime. Bruising was found on her arms and chest, consistent with being restrained by force, clear signs of a struggle, of trying to break free, to defend herself. These details painted a stark and deeply disturbing picture of her final moments. It would have required significant physical strength. The pressure applied to her neck lasted approximately 4 to 5 minutes, a span of time that may sound short, but in reality is long and exhausting when it comes to such an act. That amount of time is enough to cause death. This was not something that happened in an instant. It was a sustained process that required continuous physical effort. At around 1:30 a.m. on Sunday, while Grace's body lay in his room, Jesse carried out a series of internet searches. It happened in the quiet of the night, when everything around seems still, yet it's often when the most important details are captured. Using his phone, he searched for hottest fire, flesh-eating birds, Waitakere Rangers, a remote location where he would later try to hide Grace's body, choosing an isolated spot as if hoping time itself would erase any trace of what had happened. After that, instead of showing any signs of shock or confusion, he was browsing a pornographic website. The contrast was stark and deeply unsettling, behavior that didn't fit the way someone would normally react after something like this. Not long after, he took several intimate photos of Grace's body, actions that only reinforced the sense of cold detachment and a complete lack of empathy. Just over a month after Grace's body was found, hundreds of people gathered for her funeral at Brentwood Cathedral in Essex. It was a quiet but deeply emotional ceremony, a space filled with grief, compassion, and shared pain. People stood shoulder to shoulder, united by a tragedy that had touched everyone. There was a heavy silence in the air, broken only by soft voices and the footsteps of those who came to say goodbye. Detective Inspector Scott Beard, who had led the investigation, traveled to England to personally pay his respects and support the Mullane family. His presence was not formal, but it carried weight, a sign of respect and recognition of the loss this family had endured. 6 days after the funeral, Jesse appeared in High Court, where he entered a plea of not guilty. It was the first formal confirmation of his position, clear and unwavering, stated in the official setting of the courtroom. The trial began in November that same year and lasted just 3 weeks. Despite its relatively short length, each day was packed with detail, testimony, and tension. For most of the proceedings, Jesse remained expressionless, his face showing no emotion. He barely reacted to what was happening around him. At times, he would look down at documents, almost as if hiding in the text, or hold his head in his hands, but even those gestures felt mechanical rather than emotional. The defense built their case around a different interpretation of events. They argued that, despite the tragedy, Grace's death was the result of consensual rough sex that went wrong. They claimed she had previously engaged in similar practices, and that this time, according to them, it was an experiment that ended in a fatal outcome. According to the defense, Jesse had no intention of causing her death. They said he panicked the moment he realized what had happened, and that it was this fear and confusion that led to his actions afterward. Specifically his attempts to hide the body after what they claimed was an accidental death during an intimate encounter.
The defense case is that this is not a murder. And that's still what I say to you now. Nothing has changed. It was an accidental death that took place in the context of sexual activities that, if done incorrectly by inexperienced and/or intoxicated people, can go wrong.
But the prosecution already had a substantial body of evidence and testimony, carefully gathered, verified, and built into a clear, logical narrative. Each piece of the case supported the next, forming a complete picture of events where, in their view, there was no room for coincidence or chaos. They insisted that Jesse was not acting in panic, this was not an impulsive decision, and it certainly was not an accident. According to the prosecution, his actions told a different story, one that appeared calm, calculated, and deliberate. They argued this was a clearly intentional act, carried out without haste and without any signs of losing control. In this interpretation, there was no space for doubt. Everything pointed to a conscious decision made with full awareness of the consequences. They went on to say that afterward, he methodically and coldly began covering his tracks. This wasn't a series of chaotic attempts to hide what had happened, but a sequence of deliberate steps that, as the prosecution described it, formed a structured and thought-out pattern. He created an entire maze of fabricated stories and lies, a tangled web of versions designed to deflect suspicion, distract attention, and make it harder to uncover the truth. With each new detail, the story became more complicated, but at the same time, step by step, that construction began to collapse under the weight of the evidence.
In this case, to have killed Grace Mullane, the defendant, gentleman over here at the back behind me, had to have had her under his grip, suffocating her, strangling her is probably the correct term, for a total of 5 to 10 minutes, at some point of which she lost consciousness and would have become under his hand hold, unconscious and limp and lifeless, and he had to carry on. And if that's not reckless murder in this country, ladies and gentlemen, somebody will have to explain to me what is.
Do you find the defendant, Jesse Shane Kempson, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Despite his repeated claims of innocence throughout the entire trial, December 22nd and 2019 became the moment that ultimately decided the case. After just 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. It was swift, clear, and uncompromising. They found Jesse Kempson guilty of the murder of Grace Mullane. The relatively short time they spent deliberating only underscored how convincing the evidence was and how little doubt remained in their minds. In the courtroom, there was a tense silence as the verdict was delivered. The words landed sharply, almost cutting off any possibility of denial. Every detail of the case, every testimony, every piece of evidence, it all came together in one final conclusion. He was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. That meant he would spend at least that amount of time behind bars with no chance of early release. It may sound like a formal legal phrase, but behind it lies a reality measured in years that cannot be taken back and consequences that will last forever.
You are a large and powerful man. She was diminutive. In those circumstances, Ms. Mullane was particularly vulnerable. You were in a position of total physical dominance.
On a daily basis, I torment myself over what you did to my Grace. The terror and pain she must have experienced at your hands. As a mother, I would have done anything to change places with her. I sit full of guilt, knowing I couldn't help her, that I should have been there. She died terrified and alone in a room with you.
The verdict of murder today will be welcomed by every member of the Mullane family and friends of Grace. It will not reduce the pain, the suffering that we've had to endure for over the past year. Grace was taken away from us in the most brutal fashion a year ago, and our lives have been, and family have been ripped apart. This will be with us for the rest of our lives. We would like to thank several people. Auckland Police Force, been professional, diligent and thorough all through this investigation. Last but not least, we would love to thank the people of New Zealand. They've opened their hearts to Grace and her family. I cannot express our gratitude enough for all the offers and gifts of kindness that we have received over the last year.
I've always thought that if it wasn't Grace, it was going to be someone. Now, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't talk about psychological profile, but what we do know is he's a liar. You know, a number of times we proved he lied to the police, he lied to others.
The case sparked a powerful wave of outrage among many people, both in the public and across the media. A lot of the anger centered around how Grace's life was portrayed during the trial and the way her death was explained. For many, it felt like the focus was being shifted away from the accused and onto the victim herself. That approach was widely seen as shameful and unacceptable, a clear case of victim blaming that only deepened the pain and created a strong sense of injustice. People spoke out openly, saying that responsibility should rest solely with the killer, without excuses, without implications, and without any attempt to shift the blame. Jesse's own family also spoke about him in blunt and unfiltered terms. They described him as a pathetic fantasist, someone who had spent years living in a made-up world where truth was easily replaced with fiction. His stepbrother said he lied constantly, even about the smallest things. According to him, lying wasn't occasional, it was a pattern, something that followed Jesse in every situation. And only when there was no way out, when the facts became undeniable, he would break down, start crying, lose control, and run away, avoiding responsibility. After the high-profile trial over Grace's murder, which drew widespread public attention, Jesse appeared in court twice more the following year. These were judge-only hearings, without a jury, where decisions were based strictly on facts and evidence, without the emotional weight of public reaction. The atmosphere in those proceedings was more restrained, but no less tense, as each new charge added to the growing picture of his actions. 2 women came forward to police after seeing blurred images of Jesse released following his arrest in the Grace case. Even though the footage was unclear, they recognized him immediately. That recognition was instant and unsettling, bringing back experiences they may have tried to forget. They went to the authorities and shared their stories, detailed, painful, and filled with fear and a sense of helplessness. In the first of those cases, in October 2020, his former partner gave testimony that came across as a consistent account of ongoing abuse. She described physical, sexual, emotional, and financial violence she had endured during their relationship. According to her, Jesse held knives to her throat, strangled her, forced her into sexual acts, and controlled her finances, even withdrawing $10,000 from her account. This wasn't a single incident. It was a sustained cycle of abuse that gradually destroyed her sense of safety. He was found guilty on 8 charges and sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. That sentence became another confirmation of the seriousness of the accusations and reinforced the legal assessment of his actions. In November 2020, he appeared in court again, this time charged with the rape of a young British tourist he had met on Tinder 8 months before the murder of Grace Mullane. What began as a normal introduction quickly turned into a dangerous situation where control and coercion took over. He forced her into a sexual act and said, "If you don't do this, I'll kill you and your family, and you know I will." He was found guilty and sentenced to an additional 3.5 years in prison. This added sentence became another piece in the already established picture of his crimes. In total, it brought an additional 11 years of punishment to be served concurrently with his sentence for the murder of Grace. Formally, the sentences merge into a single time frame, but their very existence highlights the scale of what he had done, a cold, legally documented record of actions for which he was held accountable. When Judge Jeffrey Venning delivered the guilty verdict for rape, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted instantly. What had been a controlled process, guided by clear procedures and formality, suddenly filled with tension. Jesse erupted in anger, abruptly and uncontrollably, as if losing what little composure he had left. It was a moment when the outward mask of restraint cracked, exposing emotions that had been kept hidden until then. His reaction stood in sharp contrast to the calm tone of the court, intensifying the sense of unease and tension in that moment.
You're so full of mate. You have no reason to convict me. You're full of...
Tragically, in November 2020, Grace's father, David Mullane, passed away after a long and exhausting battle with cancer. This loss became yet another painful blow for a family that had already endured the unimaginable. His death added another layer of deep grief, quiet, heavy, and lasting. For those close to him, it wasn't just the end of a fight with illness, it was the closing of another chapter of loss that had forever changed their lives. In December 2020, the suppression of Jesse's name was finally lifted. This happened after the Supreme Court rejected his final appeal against his conviction in Grace's murder case. That decision marked the end of a long series of legal attempts to challenge the verdict, at least at that point in time. The name that had once been hidden behind legal restrictions became public, opening another chapter of the case to the world. It has been reported that Jesse continues to pursue further appeals, including those related to his 2020 convictions. The process remains ongoing, stretching the echo of the case over time and preventing it from fully fading from public view. Court filings, legal procedures, new attempts at review, all of it continues to keep the tension around the case alive even after sentencing. To honor Grace's memory, her family and friends came together with a shared goal to do something more than simply remember. They raised a record amount of money for the White Ribbon campaign, a charity dedicated to ending men's violence against women. The initiative focuses on engaging men and boys in actively challenging harmful behavior and helping create a safer environment for women. This wasn't just financial support, it was a clear statement, an effort to turn pain into action. In Grace's memory, more than £11,000 were raised. Every donation, no matter the amount, carried a piece of compassion, a piece of the story, a shared desire to prevent something like this from happening again. The funds became a symbol of unity among people brought together by this tragedy. In addition, an initiative called Love Grace was created in her honor. It encourages people to donate handbags filled with essential items, things that can help women who are forced to leave their homes while escaping abusive and dangerous situations. It's a simple but deeply human gesture, offering support to those in crisis at a moment when even the smallest help can make a real difference. And inside every one of those bags, there's not just practical items, but a quiet reminder of Grace, her story, and the need for change.